This is Tariq Melrose. Today's transparent update had the clarity of a fogged up mirror. They said a lot, they revealed very little, and yet somehow it was all delivered with confidence. But confidence isn't a substitute for truth. Subscribe now because we don't do vague here. We do receipts.
Republicans are once again twisting science into a political weapon, ignoring facts to score cheap shots on COVID policy. Now let's get into the Kalali.
Dr. Walensky, a couple things. As I walked in, I came in late, either you or Dr. Fauci were saying that the reason that we're not saying that natural immunity is protective as is a vaccine, even though there's recent publications showing that 6 to 8 months out, 92% of those with natural immunity have T cells, B cells, and antibodies that would be considered adequate to protect. And indeed, B cell continues to climb. That we don't have data. Now, in your response to Mr. Casey, you just mentioned that CDC has access to tens of thousands of EHRs. And I've been told that HHS or CDC has access to patient-identifiable data as to who tests positive. So I do that as a prologue. If we don't know that natural immunity confers protection against future infection, it's because we've decided not to look. Because I've learned that there is a cohort of people that we know have been previously infected. We've got the bench research showing that the triad of antibodies, T cells, and B cells are there, and that 92% of them are still there at 6 months out. So why have we not done the research showing that natural immunity confers protection against recurrent infection?
Yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to clarify this point because I understand the question. First of all, let me just reiterate that our current stand after reviewing 96 papers and a scientific brief on this issue is that everyone who's been previously infected should be vaccinated.
But that's not my question.
Right, agreed. And part of the challenge here is, as you know, the infection-induced immunity and the biases associated with retrospectively looking at the data. Several of those papers that we reviewed for that brief have demonstrated that the kind of disease that you had at the time you had it matters. Did you have disease a year and a half ago? Were you an older person?
Can I stop you for a second? We could do this prospectively because you know who is actually, apparently I'm told you've got patient-identifiable data, and you would be able to say, okay, 6 months ago, we're going to start everybody infected within the last 6 months, and be able to follow their EHR prospectively to see this. I mean, theoretically, CDC has the ability to do this right now.
Yeah, that too would have its own biases. So one of the things that we have demonstrated in the scientific brief is that asymptomatic and mildly symptomatic people who might not present to their providers, might present to an urgent care clinic, who might not be recorded in their own EHR, likely have less robust protection than those who've been severely infected.
But that could be established prospectively if using the data that you have. And you could even say, if you had symptomatic infection, you don't need to be vaccinated. We would consider you immune. You don't have to be subjected to the mandate. But
if we had data that demonstrated a correlation of protection, Dr. Fauci already mentioned data that they're working on to look at correlates of protection, not just in antibodies, but as you noted, in T cell function as well. So if we were able to document a correlate of protection, we absolutely could prospectively follow.
But this paper that I'm reading from NIH speaks that there is durable memory of the virus up to 8 months after infection in 95% of the people who recovered, including B cells, which continue to climb, T cells, and antibody. And I'm also saying you could do it clinically because we have data that's patient identifiable that we could go back and look and see if they were exposed. They could be in a hot spot like Louisiana where you know they're being exposed, and then you would see, not just by lab data, but empirically. I can tell you the American people intuitively understand this, and they feel a little bit like we're being willfully blind to it. I have limited time. Let me just ask you something else. What percent of CDC employees are vaccinated?
We're actively encouraging vaccination in all of our employees and doing a lot of education and outreach in order to get our agency fully vaccinated.
But the percent?
I don't have that for you today.
I'm told that some north of 75% of CDC employees at headquarters are still working remotely. Is that correct?
We are following regulations through HHS and the federal government.
No, that's not my question. I apologize to be rude, but I'm asking a very straightforward question. I've been told that north of 75% of employees at CDC headquarters are working remotely. Is that correct?
Senator, I don't actually know the number off the top of my
Okay,
head.
when you
so
look
I'd
down
have
the
to-
hallway, are there empty desks? Are over 50% of the desks empty?
Senator, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. What I will tell you is that we're working closely within HHS and the administration to follow the governmental rules for return to the
There was a
workplace.
recent GAO report that shows, and released in the last 2 weeks, that there's been no coordinated response from the federal government to get people back into work. Now, if there's any agency that, since we have teachers in Fulton County are back at work, that the caseload of COVID in Fulton County is about 88. At its peak, it was 606. If what I've been told by someone who, frankly, kind of knows, that people in laboratories are not showing up. I have no clue how laboratory workers who presumably are vaccinated wearing PPE would consider themselves eligible to stay at home. I say this because I just want to echo. We got to lead by example in the federal government. If our public health agencies don't have enough confidence in the immunization and in the PPE to go back to work fighting infectious diseases, there's going to be a lot of undermining of a willingness to further fund public health.
We absolutely have our essential labs back at work conducting their essential research towards this response. And we are following the regulations and providing technical assistance and technical support to the federal government for return to work policies.
One more thing. Angus King and I had sent a letter dated February the 25th asking about genomic surveillance. We've still not received a response. You referenced it in your early remarks. Both Senator King and I would appreciate a response.
We'll get back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. I'm going to go vote. The next four senators I have in my order are Senator Baldwin, Marshall, Rosen, and Murkowski. I will return.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're here today to discuss the road ahead on the pandemic response, and I fear that that road will be a rocky one if we forget the lessons that we've learned thus far, particularly when it comes to our ability to make critical supplies.
All right, folks, buckle up, because what we just heard in that exchange was a textbook example of how Republican grandstanding tries to masquerade as fact-finding, while in reality, it's nothing more than a political stunt designed to undermine public health leadership, sow distrust in science, and score cheap partisan points. Welcome back to Tarek Melrose Vlogs, where we cut through the noise, expose the hypocrisy, and defend the values of truth, democracy, and progress. Let's set the scene. A Republican senator rolls into a COVID hearing late, armed with a pocketful of half-baked gotcha questions about natural immunity, CDC remote work, and supposed blindness to certain data. But notice the tactic here. It's not about improving public health. It's about feeding into a MAGA-flavored narrative that scientists and federal agencies are either incompetent, dishonest, or both. This is the same tired script the GOP has been running since the first masks went on in 2020. They start by cherry-picking studies on natural immunity. Studies that, by the way, are real but incomplete, context-dependent, and not a replacement for vaccines in any serious medical consensus. Then they present this data as if it's the magic key the CDC is willfully ignoring. That's pure framing manipulation. The senator conveniently sidesteps the enormous variation in immune response between individuals, the fact that natural immunity can wane unpredictably, and that COVID reinfections are not hypothetical. They're happening with real risks. And here's the kicker. These same Republicans screamed bloody murder when vaccine mandates were proposed. They politicized mask wearing. They spread misinformation on social media. And now they want to act like they're the guardians of nuanced immunology. Give me a break. When Dr. Olsinski tries to actually explain the complexity that symptom severity, time since infection, and quality of immune response matter, the senator bulldozes past it with, "Why haven't you done the research?" As if the CDC isn't actively conducting and reviewing hundreds of studies worldwide. As if public health is just a matter of flipping a switch. That's the game here. Oversimplify science into something that sounds like common sense to the untrained ear. then accuse experts of incompetence when they don't give you a one-line answer. Then we pivot to the CDC's vaccination rate and remote work. Ah, yes, the MAGA obsession with empty desks in Washington. They paint it like federal scientists are lazy bureaucrats hiding at home. The reality? We're talking about one of the most pandemic-aware, PPE-protected, telework-capable workforces in the country. Remote work was, and in some cases still is, a necessary tool for safety, productivity, and yes, retaining highly skilled professionals who could otherwise be snatched up by the private sector. But instead of acknowledging that, Republicans frame it as proof of hypocrisy. If you believe in vaccines and PPE, why aren't you all crammed into cubicles again? It's such a disingenuous trap. Public health isn't a macho contest to see who can show up in person the fastest. It's about risk management. And yet to the GOP, the optics of scientists at desks matter more than the actual output of those scientists. Let's not miss the broader agenda here. Every time a Republican like this senator gets the mic, the goal isn't to strengthen pandemic response. It's to weaken public confidence in it. They want voters to believe the CDC is out of touch, Fauci was lying, and Democrats botched the pandemic. Why? Because the alternative is admitting that under Trump, COVID was downplayed, protective measures were politicized, and the GOP became a willing megaphone for anti-science rhetoric that killed hundreds of thousands of Americans unnecessarily. So instead of reckoning with that record, they nitpick about natural immunity studies, about how many CDC employees are at HQ on a Tuesday morning, about whether lab workers are showing up. This isn't oversight, it's political theater, and it's dangerous. Because when you erode trust in the institutions that actually monitor and fight pandemics, you make us weaker for the next crisis. And yes, there will be a next one. Dr. Olszynski and the CDC aren't perfect, no agency is. But in a global pandemic, you need leaders who adjust their recommendations as new data comes in. That's science. Republicans twist that adaptability into flip-flopping because in their world, clinging to a bad position is somehow a virtue if it owns the libs. In reality, it's how you end up with hundreds of thousands of preventable deaths. And notice the performative indignation. American people feel we're being willfully blind. That's not an evidence-based claim. That's a political talking point designed to create a perception of betrayal. It's part of a larger GOP pattern. Seed doubt, then exploit that doubt to justify slashing funding, gutting programs, or taking control of agencies they've spent years discrediting. The truth? The CDC has reviewed nearly 100 papers on immunity, weighed the variability of responses, and concluded that vaccination, even after infection, is the safest way to protect the population. That's the consensus across the global scientific community, not just in Atlanta. But admitting that would mean giving Democrats credit for supporting vaccination drives, for funding the very research the GOP now pretends is missing, and that's unacceptable in Republican politics, where the only acceptable pandemic narrative is one that blames Biden and absolves Trump. Let's also clock the ending here. After hammering about immunity, remote work, and lab attendance, the senator slides in a complaint about an unanswered letter on genomic surveillance. That's a valid oversight question. Genomic surveillance is crucial for catching new variants early. But notice it's tacked on as an afterthought. It's not the real priority of the exchange. The priority was optics, making the CDC director look evasive, feeding clips to right-wing media, and reinforcing the narrative that the federal COVID response is untrustworthy. This is exactly why Democrats and anyone who actually cares about science-based policy have to keep pushing back. We can't let the GOP rewrite the pandemic history books, turning their own obstruction and misinformation into tough questions for the experts who've been cleaning up their mess. We can't let them convince Americans that cherry-picked immunity stats are a substitute for comprehensive vaccination, or that working remotely in a pandemic is somehow proof of dereliction. So yeah, watch these hearings carefully, but watch them critically. Understand the tactics at play. And remember, the same Republicans who now demand to know why every lab worker isn't back in the building are the ones who mocked masks, fought vaccine mandates, and cheered on anti-lockdown protests while COVID ripped through communities. Their concern for public health is as fake as their outrage. All right, that's all for today's breakdown. The GOP can keep running their partisan sideshow, but here on Tariq Melrose Vlogs, we're going to keep bringing you the context, the facts, and the unapologetic defense of science and democracy you won't get on Fox News. If you're tired of the Republican blame game and want to stand up for truth, public health, and the values that actually save lives, hit that like button, drop a comment, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And of course, subscribe to Tariq Melrose Vlogs and ring that bell so you never miss a takedown of the hypocrisy threatening our future. Stay informed, stay loud, and I'll see you in the next one.